like this is your baby. This is a thing that you're breathing life into in the world. Like ultimately, within these four walls, you have a series of decisions that you get to choose and make each day, right? And ultimately that will become your legacy. So who do you want to be and how do you want to lead and what do you want to leave behind you?
Sarah, it would be wonderful if we could start by you sharing a little bit about your background and how you got into this space.
Yeah, totally. So when I was in grad school, I led research on the importance of equity and inclusion in the design of technology and innovation. Coming across the research in the automotive industry, where it demonstrated that when people who are pregnant get into car crashes, there's a really high likelihood that they'll lose the unborn fetus. And then digging in to understand why, and really it's because in the automotive industry, car crash safety testing is still done and has always been done using male-bodied crash test dummies as the default or the norm. At the time, Tesla was very much, well, I mean, Tesla's, been known as a disruptor for sure, but when I did some more research to understand if they were sort of uncritically importing this practice of using male-bodied crash test dummies, it became obvious that they were. And, you know, if they're such a disruptive player, why are they not being really intentional and thoughtful about a practice that we know to be really damning? Or when we know that right now there are some technology companies that are valued and have more financial resources than entire countries in the world and are outpacing law and policy and playing in these wild gray spaces, it's really scary, right? Because they are able to scale inequity at warp speed. And if they're not being intentional about their practices, to me, this is I think it's one of the most important sort of issues of our time in real time.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And you mentioned this word intention, and I think that's a really powerful word, and it's something that I'd like to chat about as we move through the interview, because I think that, and you'll probably agree that for a lot of people and companies, it might just be that they haven't even thought about these things, and then all of a sudden they get so big and things are moving so well that they don't even know how to back up, kind of address the root cause. Our approach with Bowhead, with myself, has always been, let's just keep DEI as part of the conversation. When we were building out our company, when we were designing our product, we started using androgynous characters from the get-go. We had an unspecified gender option from the get-go, and a lot of that stuff, like, I didn't fully understand at that time either. This was 5 years ago, and I really felt strongly about it, but I didn't have the language around it. But I still kind of like made sure that I mentioned it, that it was important to me. Now I have more language, which gives me more confidence in a lot of the leadership that we bring to the company. And so I'm curious if you have advice on that, or if you have thinking around, do you think companies should just start talking about it more?
Totally. I think like we have a handful of really key checklists. That one is around how to center equity when it comes to making decisions, and that's any type of decision. Like these questions work, what kind of shoes you want to buy, to your next hire, and also a version of that around product design, around hiring, like around all these sort of more granular parts of the conversation. And I think that's a really good place to start. It's sometimes 5, 6, 7 really key questions that just plant the seed, and that forces out those conversations, right? Because you can't move forward without sort of having to talk through those sort of intangible, messy, kind of weird parts of the conversation. So yeah, absolutely. It's like they're like inclusion nudges, right? Like placing things in around you, or in between you and a decision, so that you have to actually be more intentional.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Inclusion nudges. Healthcare today is not patient-centered. Healthcare of tomorrow is patient-centered. And the good news is we are very much moving towards this, and we're seeing elements of this today. And what do you think we need to be thinking about so that we can start to move from this place of stakeholder-based healthcare, where everyone, it seems, except for the patient, truly wins, to a more of an equitable system where it's very much a win-win-win-win. And we personally believe that where the patient is at the center of that system.
And I guess one of the key things that we see go wrong all the time is really around diversity of the teams, the organization, sort of more broadly. Um, like there's so many ways to embed equity into the product and product design. But the teams who are inspiring and designing and building these health technologies need to reflect a variety of lived experiences, right? Like people who look, feel, and think differently, um, across all parts of it, right? From investment to development to testing. Until probably like the last few months, with the centering of racial inequity, right, and everything relating to the Black Lives Matter movement, that the focus was still very much on it was a very women centered or gender first approach, right? Every organization still wanted to hire that one woman to join their board or their executive team. An organization says, hey, we want to achieve gender parity, as an example. Like the first question that I ask them is, so where do non-binary folks fit into your 50-50 equation, right? And also, why the focus necessarily on women? Like, do you have newcomers? Do you have trans folks? Do you have folks living with a range of different types of disability? Who else is not at the table, right? Do you have Indigenous representation? So we just like to push back, right, on when companies say, hey, we have our women-centered initiative or our BIPOC-centered initiative. From our perspective, it needs to always be a yes and it really needs to be an intersectional approach, right? Otherwise, too often people feel deeply tokenized, and I just think you get some representation, but you're not really going for the depth and breadth of human experience that you actually need for no matter what the work is that you're doing.
I think with some of these very archaic industries like finance, healthcare, it's going to be really interesting to see how the industries do evolve, because we know it's not just the doctors who have to make the decision, or the insurers and payers, the policymakers. It's really everyone coming together. And so how do you bake intention and a long-term thinking and some of these values that you really stand for into these giant industries that we know have infinite number of decision makers?
One of the questions that I like to ask our CEOs and sort of tech and innovation sectors generally is, like, this is your baby. This is a thing that you're breathing life into in the world. Like ultimately, within these four walls, you have a series of decisions that you get to choose and make each day, right? And ultimately that will become your legacy. So who do you want to be and how do you want to lead, and what do you want to leave behind you? Right? I think sometimes we get so caught up in financials and all of the minutia of the day to day that they really forget some of the fundamentals. And I think when it comes to people we love and their health, like that there's not very much that's more fundamental than that.
If there's something we've learned from the challenges of 2020, it's that diversity, equity, and inclusion need to be part of the conversation in our personal lives and in the corporate context. It's wonderful to hear of firms like Saska's Feminuity, who are on a mission to embed social justice in the corporate environment. As Saska chairs, change starts with intentionality. The rise of digital therapeutics is intended to help us all envision a better healthcare system for the digital age, one that encompasses mental health care and prevention. If you like what you see, please follow along our journey.